I want you to step back with me just for a minute into a really specific moment in time. The year is roughly 1373,
Right.
and we were in the bustling but honestly deeply traumatized city of Norwich, England. To really understand the gravity of the text we're going to explore today, you have to feel the atmosphere of the world outside the room we're about to enter.
Yeah, you really do. Because the world is, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's ending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Black Death has just swept across Europe in these horrific back-to-back waves. And we aren't talking about, a mild societal disruption. We are talking about a cataclysm.
Yeah, one that wiped out anywhere from a third to half of the population in those localized areas.
Right. So imagine like walking down a street where every other house has just been emptied by this invisible, agonizing disease. The air is just thick with grief. People are terrified, they're isolated, and they're utterly desperate for any sign that the universe hasn't just been, completely abandoned by a benevolent creator.
It's an overwhelmingly dark picture.
It is. And in the very epicenter of this apocalyptic chaos, there's a woman. She's 30 years old, and she is confined inside this small, cold stone cell attached to a church.
It's a profoundly stark image to hold in your mind, isn't it? Because you have the ultimate expression of human vulnerability and mass suffering outside. But then inside that cell, you have someone who is experiencing her own very intimate brush with mortality.
Yeah, that is the crux of it right there. She hasn't just witnessed the horror outside.
Oh.
She's literally living it. She has just survived this near-fatal illness, an illness so severe that her body had essentially shut down.
Right. She's paralyzed.
Completely paralyzed from the waist down, her eyes were fixing, and the local priest had actually been brought into her room to administer last rites.
Wow.
Yeah. She was, by all medical and religious metrics of the 14th century, actively dying. And yet from that dark, isolated stone room, from the absolute edge of death, she doesn't emerge with a message of doom.
Which would have been the standard response, right? A warning of God's wrath was incredibly common during the plague years.
Exactly. But instead, she emerges with the message of such profound, unshakable hope that it continues to serve as an anchor for believers centuries later.
Which is precisely what makes her work so enduring today. I mean, you have a world completely consumed by death and despair, this overwhelming sense of divine absence. And right in the center of it, this quiet, insistent voice begins to speak about a love that is fundamentally more powerful than any plague.
Or any fear or human failing. So, welcome to our deep dive. For those of you joining us, our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the masterpiece written by that woman, Julian of Norwich.
The book is called Revelations of Divine Love.
Right. And we are taking a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got historical documentation regarding how this text was miraculously preserved in secret for centuries. We have excerpts straight from Julian's Middle English writings, deep biblical cross-references, and some really beautiful modern devotional reflections.
Yeah, and the sources we're utilizing actually approach her writings from a conservative, evangelical perspective.
Which is great, because it aims to strip away the academic jargon. The goal is really to figure out how this highly mystical 14th century text is currently being used to deepen a modern Christian's daily faith.
Right, to provide a more profound understanding of Scripture and to inspire believers to live with a much bolder, selfless love today.
It really is a remarkable bridge across time. Because, the challenges of the 14th century and the 21st century look incredibly different on the surface. We aren't dealing with the bubonic plague in the same way, thankfully.
No, but the underlying human condition hasn't shifted an inch. We live in an age characterized by a different kind of plague, right? An epidemic of anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
There's this constant information overload and a deep, pervasive spiritual exhaustion. People today feel just as overwhelmed by the sheer scale of global crises. And when Julian speaks from that stone cell, she is speaking directly into that timeless noise.
So to you, the listener, sitting in your car or making dinner or just trying to catch your breath after a long day, we want to invite you to do something highly intentional with us today.
Yes. Step away from the immediate anxieties clamoring for your attention.
Exactly. Just put the mental to-do list on pause. Turn away from the endless doom-scrolling feed of modern news. And step with us into the quiet, perspective-shifting world of a woman who looked at a dying planet and somehow saw the entire universe held securely in the palm of God's hand.
And, to even begin to comprehend Julian's massive theological vision, we actually have to start our analysis by looking at something incredibly small.
Right.
We have to shrink our perspective down to something that could literally fall through the cracks of the
Well,
floorboards.
you have to start with a hazelnut.
Yes, a completely ordinary, tiny hazelnut. It forms the basis of one of her most striking and famous metaphors.
So the sources describe how during these intense, vivid visions, which she actually referred to in Middle English as showing Julian is observing the crucifix that was brought to her deathbed.
Right.
But suddenly, her spiritual sight opens, and she perceives something resting in the palm of her hand. She describes it as a little thing, roughly the size and quantity of a hazelnut.
It's small, it's round, and seemingly totally insignificant.
Exactly. And she looks at it with the eye of her understanding, and she asks a very natural question, what may this be? And the spiritual answer she receives is just staggering in its scope. The answer is, it is all that is made.
Let's slow down and really look at the mechanics of this vision because it's so profound. She's staring at this tiny, fragile nut, something you could just crush between two fingers.
Yeah.
And the revelation is that this tiny object represents the entirety of the cosmos, everything that has ever been created.
The vast expanse of the galaxies, the Earth, the entirety of human history, the political empires rising and falling, you, me, everything.
Right. And what strikes her isn't the majesty of the cosmos, but its intense fragility. She marvels that this quote-unquote hazelnut doesn't just instantly vanish or crumble into absolute nothingness because it appears so unbelievably small and precarious.
That fragility really is the core of the revelation.
Yeah.
And the answer she's given as to why it doesn't crumble establishes the absolute foundation of her entire theology.
She realizes that this hazelnut has three fundamental properties.
Okay, let's break those down. Okay.
Number one, God made it. Number two, God loves it. And number three, God keeps it. Made, loved, kept.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like a very simple Sunday school lesson, right? God made the world. He loves it. He keeps it. We've all heard that.
Yeah, it sounds basic.
But when you dig into the philosophical implications of that, it is completely overwhelming.
It really is the architecture of divine grace. I mean, think about the modern existential dread so many people experience today. We look up at the images from the James Webb Space Telescope and we see billions of light years of cold, indifferent, empty space.
Yeah, or we look at the sheer scope of global suffering on the news, and we just feel utterly swallowed up.
Exactly. The natural human conclusion is, I am nothing. I'm a rounding error in a cosmic machine. My life, my family, my struggles, they don't matter. But Julian's vision of the hazelnut takes that exact same feeling of smallness and entirely flips the conclusion.
So how does it flip it? Because, if we are that small, aren't we still insignificant?
Well, the difference lies in the concept of being kept. In her framework, the hazelnut, the universe, does not possess the power of its own existence.
Okay.
It doesn't have an internal battery that just keeps it going on its own. If the creator were to look away for a single fraction of a second, if he were to withdraw his active attention, the entire cosmos wouldn't just break. It would cease to have ever been. It would return to the void.
Wow.
Therefore, the fact that you wake up in the morning, the fact that there is a universe at all, means that you are being actively, intentionally sustained in every given millisecond purely out of an unceasing act of divine love.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Right.
It challenges a very pervasive, almost default way that even religious people view the world. When you read the Genesis creation account, or just think about God in general, the temptation is to view him as this supreme engineer.
Yes, exactly.
You imagine a massive cosmic architect who drafted the blueprints, built the machine of the universe, established the laws of physics and gravity to keep it running, and then just stepped back. He wound it up, and now he's watching it tick away from a distance, maybe occasionally intervening if something breaks.
Right, the classic clockmaker theory.
But Julian is completely rejecting that deistic framework.
Rejecting it entirely, that mechanical view makes God distant and cold.
Right. So instead of an engineer walking away from a machine, it's more like a musician singing a note. The note only exists as long as the breath is actively being pushed through the vocal cords.
Oh, that's good.
The moment the singer stops intending for the note to exist, the sound is gone. Julian is saying the universe is the sustained breath of God. It requires fierce, active, continuous love just to hold it in reality.
That musical analogy captures the essence perfectly. And, the devotional sources point out that this isn't just a mystical, poetic idea born out of a fever dream. It is actually a deeply robust piece of biblical theology.
Where do we see that in Scripture?
The authors of our sources draw a direct line between Julian's hazelnut and the Apostle Paul's letter to the Colossians, specifically Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. Paul is writing about the supremacy of Christ, and he states, "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together."
Hold together. I want to pause on those two words because I think we read past them way too quickly.
We absolutely do. If we dive into the original Greek of that manuscript, the word Paul uses there is sumastemi. It's a compound word. Sun, meaning together with, and histemi, meaning to set, to stand, or to place.
Okay.
So it translates literally to hold together, to cohere, or to stand intimately bound. The biblical worldview that Paul is arguing for, and the exact reality that Julian is experiencing in vivid color in her cell, is that the universe is actively sunastemi.
So it's not on autopilot.
Not at all. The structural integrity of a skyscraper, the orbit of the moon, the precise firing of synapses in your brain right now, none of it is on autopilot.
Yeah.
It is all actively held together by the relentless, sustaining power of the Creator.
So I want to ground this for the listener. What is the actual practical application of sunastemi on a random Tuesday morning? You're sitting in gridlock traffic, you're stressed about an email from your boss, or maybe you're sitting in a doctor's waiting room terrified of what the test results are going to say. How does the hazelnut change that moment?
Well, the devotional application highlighted in the sources is that it absolutely shatters the illusion of self-reliance, which is really the root of so much modern anxiety.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Modern culture tells you that you are entirely responsible for holding your own life together. You have to hustle, you have to manage your image, you have to secure your own future, and if you slip up, your world falls apart.
It's just an exhausting way to live.
It's crushing. But Julian's theology says to you, drop the illusion. You never had the power to hold your own life together in the first place. You are the hazelnut. You don't exist by chance, and you're not surviving purely by your own strength or your own wit. You are being sustained today, right in this very second, because you are fiercely loved.
Yeah.
If your life is held in the sovereign palm of the Creator, then your fragile hopes, your family, your future, they are profoundly secure.
Not because nothing bad will ever happen.
Exactly. Not because bad things won't happen, but because you cannot fall out of the hand that is sustaining reality itself.
Man, it just reorients your entire nervous system. It gives you permission to stop clenching your fists around your own life. But, that immediately leads to a significant theological friction point.
Oh, for sure.
We have this grand vision of a sovereign creator holding the entire cosmos in his palm, and it's majestic. But it can also feel incredibly abstract. If God is that massive and we are that microscopic, how on earth does he relate to us on a personal, messy, human level?
Right.
Because let's be honest, in the midst of deep suffering, knowing that God is holding the universe together mathematically doesn't always comfort a broken heart.
You've hit on the exact tension that Julian herself wrestles with. And she finds the resolution to that tension not by retreating into abstract academic philosophy, but by staring directly, unflinchingly, at the excruciating physical reality of Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
The historical sources note that her visions are overwhelmingly Christocentric. They're anchored in the passion and the suffering and crucifixion of Christ.
And it's crucial to understand that for Julian, this wasn't just an intellectual exercise. The historical context shows that before her illness, she had actively prayed to physically understand the sufferings of Christ.
Yes.
She wanted to comprehend the true depth of what happened on Calvary.
She did. And the way she interprets the cross is fascinating. To give some context, much of Western theology relies heavily on the concept of penal substitution.
Let's define that for the listener, just so we're all on the same page.
Certainly. Penal substitution is a forensic, legal model of understanding salvation. It suggests that humanity broke God's law, a penalty of death was demanded by divine justice, and Christ stepped into the courtroom, so to speak, to take that specific punishment upon himself. He paid the legal debt.
Which is a deeply established Orthodox evangelical view.
Yes, absolutely. And Julian does not deny the saving work of the cross, but she focuses on a different dimension of it. For her, the physical suffering of Jesus is not just a transactional legal payment. She views the cross as the ultimate cosmic display of the infinite vulnerability of God.
The infinite vulnerability of the divine. That is a paradox right there.
Yeah.
God is supposed to be omnipotent, invulnerable.
Exactly. But in her 10th revelation, she experiences this incredibly intimate, staggering moment. She sees Christ looking down into his own wounded side. He shows her his cloven, physically broken heart, and he says to her, "Lo, how I love thee." Julian realizes that the exact same God who possesses the omnipotent power to hold the universe in his hand willingly allowed his own heart to be physically torn open, just to prove the desperate depth of his love for the creature, its omnipotence expressing itself through total surrender.
And this realization leads her to introduce a type of imagery that, as the sources point out, is likely going to catch some listeners completely off guard.
Yeah, it definitely will.
Based on this radical vulnerability, she begins to refer to Jesus not just as our Savior, but as our mother.
Yes. This is without a doubt one of the most famous and perhaps debated aspects of her entire theological framework.
So I really want to press into this because this is where the modern application gets complex. To a conservative evangelical ear today, hearing someone refer to Jesus as our mother sounds incredibly jarring.
It does.
We are so deeply anchored in the traditional biblical language of God the Father and Christ the Son. And modern debates about gendered language and theology can be extremely contentious. So how does a lay believer approach Julian's language today without feeling like she's drifting into something unbiblical or, attempting to rewrite the traditional fatherhood of God?
It is a vital question, and it's one the devotional sources address head-on. The key to understanding Julian here is context. When Julian uses this language, she is absolutely not engaging in modern gender politics, nor is she attempting to erase or replace the fatherhood of God.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
She is operating entirely within a strict Orthodox Trinitarian framework. She explicitly states in her writings, "As truly as God is our Father, so truly is God our Mother."
So she isn't subtracting from God's identity. She's trying to expand the human analogy to capture something that the word father alone, in her medieval context, might not fully encompass.
Exactly. She's looking for the deepest, most sacrificial, most visceral human relationship in existence to use as an analogy for what Christ did on the cross. And she lands on motherhood. Think about the physical reality of giving birth.
Right.
A mother risks her own life. Her body is literally torn. She bleeds and she labors in agonizing pain to bring a child out of darkness and into the light of new life.
I see the connection she's making. She is looking at the crucifixion, the tearing of flesh, the blood, the water, the agonizing hours-long labor of Christ on the cross. And she's equating that to the trauma and sacrifice of childbirth.
Precisely. Christ on the cross is laboring in cosmic agony to bring humanity into the new birth of salvation. But the analogy doesn't stop at birth. After a mother brings a child into the world, how does she sustain that life?
She feeds the infant.
Right, with the substance of her own body. Julian looks at the sacrament of the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, where Christ says, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you." She sees a Savior who literally feeds and sustains believers with his very self, nurturing us with the intense, intimate devotion of a nursing mother holding her child to her breast.
When you lay out the mechanics of the metaphor like that, it makes profound sense. It strips away the controversy and reveals just this beautiful picture of sacrifice. And the sources highlight that Julian is not just inventing this maternal imagery out of thin air either.
No, not at all.
It actually has deep, robust roots throughout the biblical text, particularly in the Old Testament prophets.
It absolutely does. The prophets frequently employed maternal imagery when trying to describe the fierce, protective, and compassionate love of God for the nation of Israel. The sources point us specifically to the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 13.
Let's hear it.
In this text, God is speaking to a suffering people, and he promises, "As one whom his mother comforteth, so will I comfort you."
Let's do another deep dive into the linguistics there, because I feel like the English word comfort has been a bit watered down in modern usage. We think of like a comfortable chair or a polite pat on the back.
You're right. The English translation loses some of the grit there. If we look at the original Hebrew root used by Isaiah for the word comforteth, it's the word nachem.
Nachem.
Yes, and nachem is not a polite, distant pleasantry. It's a word that carries a heavy physical, emotional weight. Its root implies the act of breathing deeply, sighing, or groaning. It describes a gut-level compassion.
So it's very physical.
It is the physical and emotional resonance you feel when you see someone you love in excruciating pain, and you feel their pain in your own stomach.
It's the visceral reaction of a parent watching their child suffer.
Exactly. It's entering into their sorrow to bring them out of it. Julian's theology is saturated in the nachem of God. She portrays a creator who is the highest of the high, the sovereign Lord of all, who willingly bends down into the blood and dirt of our broken lives to nurse his children.
This connects beautifully to a specific devotional reflection in our sources, focusing on Julian's fourth major quote. In her vision, Jesus speaks to her and says, I am a. I it am that is highest. I it am that is lowest. I it am that is all.
Such a powerful statement.
It really is. And the devotional authors apply this directly to the modern believer's search for belonging. When you feel orphaned by the world, when you feel abandoned by your community, or even when you're deeply let down by the failures of your own earthly parents, which, let's be honest, is a very real trauma for many people, you can hear that divine voice speaking over your life.
Yes.
God is essentially saying, I'm your father, your mother, your friend, your all.
He.
He encompasses and perfects every fragment of untainted love that we desperately crave from earthly relationships, but inevitably find lacking because humans are fallible.
It is the ultimate statement of spiritual security. It's
Yeah.
meant to silence every internal doubt and satisfy the deepest human longings for attachment and unconditional acceptance.
Okay, I love the beauty of this, but I have to play the skeptic here because any thinking listener who is tracking with us is going to hit a massive, unavoidable brick wall right about now.
You're talking about the problem of sin and evil.
Absolutely. The classic problem of theodicy. Because if we establish that God loves us with this intense motherly nachum, and if he holds us so tightly and securely in his hand like the hazelnut, why is our daily lived experience still so brutally plagued by failure and sin?
Right.
Why do I still lose my temper with my kids? Why do people struggle for decades with addiction? Why do we hurt each other so deeply? If God is this loving, and he is holding everything together, why does he allow us to keep repeatedly falling face first into the ditch?
It's the most urgent question of the human experience, and it brings us to Julian's incredibly unique and some would say startling theology of sin. She doesn't shy away from the pain of human failure, but to answer why it's permitted, she first has to examine the actual ontological nature of sin itself.
Ontological meaning the nature of its being.
Exactly. Drawing heavily on the classical theological frameworks established by St. Augustine, Julian makes a claim that sounds completely counterintuitive at first. She argues that sin has no actual substance.
I'm going to stop you right there. Sin has no substance.
I know, it sounds...
Because when I'm carrying the guilt of a major moral failure, or when I look at the very real, tangible damage done by violence or theft, it feels incredibly heavy and substantial.
It absolutely feels heavy. And we need to be clear here. Julian is not denying the devastating psychological and relational pain that sin causes. The trauma is real. But she is speaking ontologically, meaning, as you said, she's looking at the fundamental nature of reality.
Okay, crack with me here.
In classical Christian thought, God created all things, and everything he created was inherently good. Therefore, if everything that exists is good, evil cannot be a created thing with independent existence.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. You're saying evil isn't the dark substance that God created to balance the light.
No, it's not a substance at all. Augustine and Julian, following him, define sin as a privation, a lack or a falling away from the good. It is a no-being, or a non-ens.
Give me an analogy for that. How can an action be a lack of something?
Think about darkness. Darkness is not an actual physical substance that you can sweep into a corner, right?
Right.
Darkness is simply the term we use to describe the absence of photons, the absence of light. Or think about a cavity in a tooth. The cavity isn't a thing that was added to the tooth. It is the rotting away of the healthy enamel. Or rust on a car. Rust isn't an independent material. It's the degradation and oxidation of the iron.
Okay, I see. So sin is spiritual rust. It's a pothole on the road. It's not the road itself. It's the absence of the road where the road should be.
Exactly. Sin is a corruption of a good desire or a failure to love perfectly. And the reason this abstract philosophy is so crucial to Julian is this. Because sin is merely a lack of good, a non-ens, it does not possess ultimate reality.
Right.
It cannot, in the end, withstand the power of love, which is the ultimate reality.
That makes sense philosophically, but it still doesn't answer my question. If sin is just spiritual rust, why does the loving God allow the rust to form on us in the first place? Why not just make us immune to it?
This is where Julian introduces the concept of pedagogy.
Teaching.
Yes, pedagogy is the method and practice of teaching. Julian argues that God permits sin. He allows us to fall not primarily as a punitive measure to punish us, but as a severe mercy. It's a divine teaching tool designed to break our pride, cultivate true humility, and ultimately draw the soul into a much deeper, more authentic dependence on his grace.
So we have to fall to learn we can't stand on our own.
Yes. Think about a parent teaching a young child how to ride a bicycle. The parent deeply loves the child and wants them to ride safely, but at some point, the parent has to let go of the seat.
Right.
The parent knows the child is likely going to fall and scrape their knee. The parent doesn't enjoy seeing the child bleed, and the parent isn't forcing the child to crash. But the parent allows the fall because the pain of the scraped knee is an essential part of mastering the balance.
It breaks the false confidence.
Exactly. The fall shatters the child's false confidence. It produces the humility needed for the child to realize, I can't do this purely on my own momentum yet. I need to listen to my parents' instruction. The temporary pain of the scrape leads to a deeper trust, and ultimately to the freedom of knowing how to ride.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The fall isn't the end of the relationship. It's a required step in the maturation process.
Right.
And Julian illustrates this exact dynamic through a very famous vision in her writings known as the parable of the Lord and the servant, right?
Yes, and it's a masterpiece of spiritual storytelling. In this vision, she sees a Lord sitting in state and a servant standing before him. The Lord gives the servant a commission, and the servant rushes out, incredibly eager to do the will of his Lord out of deep love.
But then he falls.
Right. In his blind haste, the servant trips and falls headlong into a deep, dark, craggy ditch. He is injured, his clothes are ragged, he's writhing in pain, and he's so trapped by the walls of the ditch that he can't even turn his head to look back up at his Lord.
He is completely paralyzed by his own failure.
Exactly. He is consumed by his physical pain and his sense of utter worthlessness. But the crucial part of the vision is how the Lord reacts. Julian watches the Lord look down at this failed, muddy, broken servant, and the Lord does not look at him with wrath.
No, I told you so.
No disappointment or blame whatsoever. He looks at him with profound pity, tender compassion, and an unbroken love. The Lord sees the servant's original goodwill and desire, even though the execution was a catastrophic failure.
And the sources point out that there's a brilliant theological double meaning in this specific parable. The servant isn't just one person.
Right. It's a dual representation. First, the servant represents Adam, and by extension, all of humanity. We are the ones who ran out, tripped, and fell into the ditch of sin, death, and misery. We are trapped in our ragged clothes. But simultaneously, the servant represents Christ, the second Adam. Christ willingly leaves the presence of the Father, puts on the ragged clothes of human flesh, and intentionally dives headfirst into the ditch of human misery, suffering, and death in order to rescue the fallen man who's trapped at the bottom.
He doesn't just throw a rope down into the ditch. He jumps into the mud with us.
He becomes the servant in the ditch to lift us out. And this revelation completely revolutionizes how Julian understands our daily struggles with sin. Because sin has no fundamental being, and because Christ has already absorbed the reality of the ditch, Julian realizes that human failure can endlessly be forgiven.
Not just a one-time thing.
Not forgiven once at salvation and then you're on probation. No. Endlessly forgiven. The devotional authors emphasize this point beautifully. The mercy of God is not a finite resource in a bank account that you can deplete with too many withdrawals. It is an infinite ocean that can never be drained.
I really want the listener to absorb the practical implication of that. For the Christian walking through daily life, this shifts your entire center of gravity. So much of modern religious practice is dominated by an obsessive, crippling focus on our own guilt.
Yes, it is.
We constantly accuse ourselves, we wallow in shame when we make the same mistake for the 100th time. But honestly, Julian is suggesting that wallowing in shame is just another insidious form of pride, because it keeps the focus entirely on us and our performance.
It is absolute pride. It's saying, my sin is somehow more powerful than God's capacity to forgive.
Yes, but Julian's theology frees us to look up, to stop staring at the mud in the ditch, and to look at the endless ocean of mercy. It sets an incredibly high standard for how we view ourselves and others. We are called to absolutely hate the sin because the rust destroys the car, the disease destroys the body, but we are called to endlessly love the soul.
That is the crucial distinction.
God hates sin because it damages his beloved children, but he never ever hates his children.
If a listener is carrying a crushing weight of guilt today, if you are believing the lie that your specific sin is too great, too repetitive, or too deeply shameful to be forgiven, Julian's message is that you have misunderstood the nature of reality. Love is the only true being.
Wow.
Love will have the final, authoritative word over your life. You are permitted to let go of the self-flagellation and simply let the endless forgiveness of God wash over you.
It is an incredibly liberating framework.
Yeah.
It brings a profound sense of peace. But I have to push back again.
Okay, bring it on.
Because I can easily imagine a modern, cynical skeptic listening to everything we've
Yeah.
just discussed and saying, okay, this is all very poetic, that tiny hazelnut, the motherly nursing love, the endless ocean of forgiveness. It makes for a great inspirational poster.
Right.
But it sounds incredibly naive. It sounds like the detached, privileged musings of a woman who spent her life sitting quietly in a church, completely insulated from the real, brutal, messy suffering of the actual world.
It's a very natural assumption to make when you hear words of such profound comfort. We tend to distrust peace unless we know it has been tested.
Exactly.
But looking at the historical reality of Julian's life proves that assumption entirely wrong. Her theology wasn't formed in a vacuum of privilege, it was forged in an absolute furnace of suffering. That historical context is precisely what makes her promises of peace so credible.
Let's really establish that context. She was an anchoress. That is a term we do not use today. What exactly did the daily physical reality of an anchoress look like in 14th century England?
An anchoress was a specific type of religious recluse, but unlike a monk or a nun who lived in a community, an anchoress took permanent, irrevocable vows to be literally physically enclosed in a small cell attached to the side of a church. In Julian's case, it was St. Julian's Church in Norwich.
Yeah, the enclosure ceremony was intense, right?
Incredibly stark. The bishop would literally perform the Catholic Mass for the dead over her, symbolizing that she was now dead to the secular world, buried with Christ. She would step into the cell, and the door would be sealed or walled up behind her.
Walled up, she is living in a tomb.
Essentially, yes. Her cell typically had only 3 small windows. One window looked inward to the church altar so she could participate in the daily liturgy and receive communion. A second window looked into a small adjoining room where a servant would bring her basic food and remove her waste.
And the third.
The third window, known as the parlor window, opened outward to the bustling street.
So she wasn't entirely cut off from humanity in a sensory deprivation chamber. She was actually interacting with the public.
Very much so. The role of an anchoress was to be a spiritual anchor for the community. People from all over the city and sometimes from afar would come to that street-facing window to seek her counsel, ask for prayer, and pour out their grief. And the grief of Norwich in that era was incomprehensible.
Let's talk about that grief. Julian was born around 1342.
Yes, and when she was just a young child, the first massive wave of the Black Death hit Norwich. Historical records estimate that somewhere between 50 to 60% of the city's population died in a matter of months.
60%. I want listeners to really process that number. Imagine everyone you know, your family, your coworkers, your neighborhood. Now imagine more than half of them dead, their bodies piled in the streets within a single season.
Yeah.
The psychological trauma of that on a young child is just unimaginable.
It's apocalyptic. And it wasn't just one wave. The plague returned in subsequent outbreaks throughout her life. On top of the disease, there was massive economic and social upheaval. She lived through the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, which was incredibly violent.
Right.
She witnessed deep systemic corruption within the political landscape and a massive schism within the Catholic Church itself, with rival popes excommunicating each other. Society felt like it was tearing apart at the seams.
So to say she was insulated is almost laughably incorrect. She was sitting at the window day after day, listening to the wailing of a traumatized, dying city. She is living in an era that is arguably much darker, infinitely more violent, and far more physically unstable than our own modern era.
Exactly. She wrote the first draft of these revelations known as the Short Text, shortly after her near-death experience in 1373. And then she spent decades in that cell, meditating on the visions, counseling the grieving, and eventually writing the expanded long text.
And that text itself is a milestone.
It is. It's worth noting here from the historical sources that her long text represents an incredible historical milestone. Julian of Norwich is the first woman known to have written a book in the English language.
That fact alone should make her a household name in history classes. The sheer intellectual brilliance to write theology in the vernacular English rather than Latin is astounding.
It is. But the sources also explain why she wasn't a household name for a very long time. For centuries, her work was essentially hidden in the shadows. Because she was deeply embedded in a Catholic monastic context, and because she wrote about visions and female imagery for God, her writings were incredibly dangerous to circulate during the turbulence of the English Reformation.
Right. Protestant reformers were actively destroying monasteries and monastic libraries. So how did the text survive?
It was meticulously copied and preserved in a very small number of private manuscripts by English Catholics, often nuns living in exile on the continent. It remained largely hidden from the Protestant mainstream for roughly 300 years.
300 years.
Yeah, it wasn't actually printed and published as a book until 1670 by a man named Serenus de Cressy, who was a royal chaplain that had converted and become a Benedictine monk.
300 years of silence. And yet, once it was finally recovered and circulated widely in the 19th and 20th centuries, it just exploded in popularity.
Yeah. It transcended denominational lines. Today, it is revered by Catholic theologians, Protestant evangelicals, and even secular literary figures like the poet T.S. Eliot, who famously quoted her in his work, Four Quartets. And the reason it resonates with such universal power is precisely because of everything we just discussed. Her peace was not forged on a sunny beach, it was forged in the fire of the plague.
Which brings us to the emotional climax of her entire book, her most famous defining phrase. Looking out at a world of death, sin, and disease, she declares, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well."
It is arguably one of the most beloved and quoted sentences in the history of Christian spirituality. But we must be very careful to understand exactly how she arrived at that conclusion.
And this is where I'm going to push back hard, because taking that phrase out of context can be incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely.
If I go up to a listener today who has just lost their spouse to cancer, or who has just discovered their child is struggling with severe depression, or who has just been handed foreclosure papers, and I pat them on the back and say, "Don't worry, all shall be well," that sounds incredibly dismissive.
Yes.
In modern psychology, we call that toxic positivity. It is slapping a happy, superficial slogan over real, bleeding trauma. How is Julian's "all shall be well" fundamentally different from a cheap bumper sticker?
I'm glad you're pushing back because that is a vital distinction, and it's where modern readers often misinterpret her. Toxic positivity fundamentally demands that you ignore the pain. It demands that you suppress the negative, look on the bright side, and pretend the trauma isn't happening. Julian does the exact opposite.
She leans into it.
She dives into it. Her assurance that all shall be well does not come before she addresses the suffering. It comes after staring directly into the abyss of human cruelty. It comes after she physically shares in the bleeding, cloven heart of Christ on the cross. It comes after she interrogates God, practically begging him to explain why sin and evil were not prevented in the first place if he is so powerful.
So her hope isn't a denial of the dark, it is a victory over it.
Precisely. Her all shall be well is not a naive, fingers-crossed optimism. It is an eschatological certainty.
Break down that word, eschatological, for the listener.
Eschatology is the theology of ultimate things, the final destiny of humanity and the cosmos. Julian is given a vision of the end of time. She sees that the love that actively holds the hazelnut is infinitely more powerful and enduring than any localized force of evil, disease, or sin.
Okay.
She believes with rigorous intellectual and spiritual conviction that at the end of all history, God will take every single tear, every senseless tragedy, every disease, and every failure, and he will somehow weave it into a tapestry of glory that we simply lack the current capacity to comprehend.
The sources connect this exact concept explicitly to the New Testament, specifically the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans.
Yes, Romans 8.28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him.
Okay, but again, that verse is often used as a band-aid. Does eschatology really comfort someone who is sitting in the ICU waiting room right now?
It depends on how you understand the mechanics of what God is doing. Let's look at the Greek text of Romans 8.28, just as we did with Colossians. The phrase Paul uses for all things work together is panta thunerge.
Panta thunerge.
Panta means all things, no exceptions. Synergai, where we get the word synergy, means works together or actively cooperates. The biblical promise isn't that God will merely make you feel better about the bad things.
Right.
The promise is that God actively enters into the chaos, the plague outside Julian's window, the frailties of our own flesh, the darkest, most senseless moments of your life, and he actively bends and directs those very circumstances toward his ultimate glorious purposes.
It is the ultimate redemption of waste. Nothing is wasted.
Exactly. It reframes the entire hero experience. It's a hard-won certainty. It is looking at the absolute worst the world has to offer, looking at death itself, and having the audacity to say, even this will be redeemed, even this will be made subservient to love. As the devotional authors state, this is not a wishful thought. It is a certainty grounded in the unchanging nature of God himself.
So as we bring these profound theological concepts down to earth, we are faced with the question of application. Knowing all of this, knowing that God actively sustains us like the fragile hazelnut, that Christ nurtures and feeds us with the fierce compassion of a mother, that our persistent sins are pedagogical tools absorbed by an endless ocean of forgiveness, and that ultimately, Panta Synergae, all shall be well well. How do we actually activate this?
Yeah, that's the real question.
How do we live this out when the alarm goes off on a mundane Tuesday morning and we still have to face a stressful reality?
The practical application, according to Julian, hinges entirely on how we view and practice prayer, because our theology dictates how we communicate with the divine. For many of us in the modern era, prayer has been reduced to a transaction. We treat God like a cosmic vending machine or a divine concierge.
Right, we put in the coins of our good behavior, or we offer up our desperate, panicked pleas, and we expect him to immediately dispense the exact circumstantial outcome we asked for. Lord, fix this specific problem, change my boss's mind, give me this specific job, heal this specific ailment. We fundamentally use prayer as an attempt to bend God's sovereign will to align with our own desires.
Exactly. And when the vending machine doesn't dispense what we asked for, we fall into a crisis of faith. We think God is angry or absent or that we didn't pray hard enough. But for Julian, the fundamental purpose of prayer is entirely different. She introduces a beautiful Middle English concept she calls oneing.
Oneing, making two things into one.
Yes. Prayer is the practice of uniting the human soul with the divine will in perfect peace. She explicitly writes, "Prayer oneth the soul to God." The ultimate goal of our communication with God is not to change God's mind about our circumstances. The goal is to align our hearts and our perspective with His eternal reality.
There is a quote of hers in the sources that I think really illuminates the psychology of this. She says, "Peace and love are ever in us, being and working. But we be not always in peace and in love. But he will we take heed that he is the ground of our whole life in love."
It is a brilliant psychological insight into the human condition. She recognizes that despite all this glorious theology, on a daily basis, we are not always at peace. We are constantly fluctuating.
Our emotions are incredibly volatile. Think about navigating a plane. If a pilot tries to fly a plane based purely on how the turbulence makes his stomach feel, he will crash. The storm outside is chaotic, the plane is bouncing, the pilot feels panicked. But the pilot has to look at the instrument panel. He has to trust the foundational laws of aerodynamics that are keeping the plane aloft, regardless of the turbulence.
Oh, that's a great metaphor.
If we look inward to our own emotions to find our security, we are going to be completely lost. One day you wake up full of faith, ready to conquer the world. The next day you wake up terrified, anxious, and you have no idea why. Julian is saying Jesus is the instrument panel. He is the foundational bedrock. You have to stop navigating by the storm clouds of your feelings and start navigating by the solid ground of his love.
That analogy of the instrument panel is perfect. If Christ is the unchanging ground of our reality, then our foundational peace does not rise and fall with our emotional state. And this provides a wildly practical application for a very common struggle: the feeling of spiritual dryness.
What does she advise when you sit down to pray or you go to church and you just feel absolutely nothing? When the heavens seem like they are made of brass and your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling?
That is the moment when oneing is most critical. Julian encourages believers to continue to pray precisely when they feel that dryness and barrenness. She teaches that God accepts the goodwill and the sheer stubborn travail of his servants, even when they feel absolutely no emotional consolation.
That is incredibly freeing.
It is. She's saying that your prayer is acceptable and deeply pleasing to God simply because you're doing it out of obedience and a raw desire for Him. It is not dependent on you conjuring up a mountaintop emotional experience or feeling spiritually ecstatic. The simple act of turning your face toward Him, even in the dark, is an act of profound love.
It takes all the performance anxiety out of our spiritual lives. You don't have to put on a show for God. You just have to show up.
And when you internalize that, it frees the believer to live each day with a radical boldness. If you truly, deeply believe that you are sustained every second by God's love, that your inevitable failures are already covered by an infinite mercy, and that the end of your story is guaranteed to be well, it completely reorders your daily priorities.
It drains the power from all our lesser pursuits. You are suddenly freed from the exhausting rat race of ambition, the desperate, hollow need for human approval, and the paralyzing fear of what the future holds. Because none of those things define your reality anymore.
Exactly. You are free to just focus on the task in front of you. You can love your neighbor selflessly because you aren't trying to extract your own security from them. You can walk humbly in repentance without being crushed by shame.
Right.
In the mundane rhythms of life, whether you are making breakfast for your toddlers, answering a barrage of stressful emails at work, or trying to have a difficult conversation with a neighbor, you can let divine love be the actual motive and the goal of your actions.
You begin living as someone who inherently belongs to that love. As the devotional reflection in our sources states so beautifully, pulling all these threads together for the modern Christian, you are not a cosmic accident. You are not a mistake. You are not an afterthought. You are a creature of love, made by love, for love, and unto love.
It is the ultimate summary of her entire body of work.
What an absolute journey this deep dive has been today. To synthesize everything we have unpacked, we started by looking at a tiny, fragile hazelnut in the palm of a hand. We discovered the staggering reality that our lives, no matter how small or precarious they feel, are actively, continuously sustained every single second by a divine sinus dominum, a holding together fueled by love.
Yes.
We looked unflinchingly at the agonizing reality of the cross, and instead of just seeing a legal transaction, we saw the infinite vulnerability and the motherly, fierce, Nachum compassion of Christ. We dismantled the crushing weight of our own guilt by reframing sin as a lack of being a pedagogical tool that, while painful, ultimately drives us into an endless, undrainable ocean of divine forgiveness. And finally, we saw how a woman who was literally walled into a stone tomb during the height of the bubonic plague could look out at a traumatized, dying world and confidently declare with eschatological certainty that all shall be well.
It is nothing short of a theological triumph. Julian brilliantly balances the awe-inspiring transcendence of a creator who holds the vast cosmos with the intimate immanence of a savior who is willing to jump down into the muddy ditch to weep with us and rescue us.
To you, the listener, navigating your own modern challenges, we hope this deep dive has provided you with a fresh, enduring set of eyes for your own life. We hope it has equipped you to face the very real chaos, anxiety, and noise of the 21st century with the quiet, unshakable, battle-tested confidence of a 14th century anchorite. You are held, you are endlessly loved, you are kept securely.
As we close, if we're truly going to connect Julian's medieval reality to your daily life, I want to leave you with one final, provocative question to ponder as you go about your week. Consider the historical irony of Julian's life. She was literally physically walled into a cramped stone cell for the vast majority of her adult life. She could not leave. She could not travel. Yet inside that intense physical confinement, she experienced a vast, limitless universe of divine love and ultimate spiritual freedom. In many ways, she was infinitely freer than the people walking around outside her window.
So the question is, what invisible walls have you built?
Exactly. What invisible walls of anxiety, of relentless ambition, of stubborn self-reliance, or of deeply hidden shame have you constructed around your own life? You might firmly believe that those walls are protecting you from getting hurt, or that they are necessary to make you successful and secure. But might they actually be the very things keeping you imprisoned? Might your desperate attempt to control your own life be the exact barrier preventing you from surrendering, stepping out of your own way, and simply resting securely in the palm of God's hand?
It really makes you wonder who is actually trapped, the woman locked in the 14th century stone cell, or us, constantly exhausting ourselves by striving to hold our own fragile hazelnuts together. Let that thought linger with you today. Take a deep breath. Let go of the illusion of control, because ultimately all shall be well.